Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. And it's time to see what's making the headlines with the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman and the deputy editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages. The Guardian leads with the government being accused of attempting a cover-up of messages sent during the pandemic, which it's now been given 2 extra days to hand over to the COVID inquiry. The Mirror has that story too and pictures Boris Johnson out for a jog today with the headline, "Running and Hiding." According to the Eye, scientists and technology experts have warned artificial intelligence could lead to the extinction of humanity. That story also making the front page of the Daily Mail. And the Times also makes it their top story tomorrow too. The Sun returns to the Philip Schofield saga with news that his former co-presenter Holly Willoughby will be back on This Morning next Monday. The Express reports that civil servants intend to strike over the government's plan to deport migrants to Rwanda. The Metro has the story of a teacher who lost his job after making a social media post aimed at 4 teenagers he claimed had threatened to harm his wife. According to the Financial Times, the re-elected Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is being lobbied by Western nations to vote to admit Sweden to NATO. And the Star has the story of a whale that some people claim has been trained as a Russian spy. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. And of course, we're joined tonight by Jenny Kleeman and Henry Hill. Great to see you both. Thanks so much for joining us. And certainly that warning, that very stark warning about artificial intelligence leading on many of the front pages. Jenny, let's kick off with the front page of the Eye. Their headline, "All creators, AI creators, I should say, fear the extinction of humanity."
Yeah, this is quite a headline. This is because industry leaders, godfathers of AI, plus the CEOs of OpenAI, Google, DeepMind, and lots of really influential thinkers in this space, put out this extraordinary 23-word statement today, saying essentially that the potential dangers of AI, and it is potential dangers, it's not the current dangers, but the potential dangers of AI should be considered on par with pandemics and the threat of nuclear war. And this is something that thinkers in this space have been saying for quite a long time. But the fact that you have these CEOs also signing this letter is very significant, because the issue is not what language models like ChatGPT could do now. It's not about AIs taking our jobs. It's about the fact that they're learning at a pace that is kind of worrying the people who even developed these models. And it's good that we're having these discussions now, because at the moment they are not an existential threat to us. But for example, if we are using AIs to develop drugs, we have to make sure that we couldn't use them to develop chemical weapons, for example, or bioengineered viruses. We need to make sure that we optimize them to have our values rather than their own set of values. We need to make sure that we're not relying on them to such an extent that if they have bugs in them or if they go down, that we are incredibly vulnerable. And even with language models like ChatGPT, the CEO of OpenAI only a few weeks ago was warning about the dangers of, for example, being able to ask an AI, who should I vote for? Who's better on the economy? So the fact is we need to have some sort of regulation. It is possible. It happened in biotech, for example. We don't clone human beings, even though it's technologically possible. And this is just a way of having that discussion, putting that on the table. And yes, it leads to lots of Terminator type of headlines. But in fact, it's just sensible precautionary thinking, given the state of the software at the moment.
And Henry, the Daily Mail also leading on this story tomorrow with a bit more detail on their front page. But certainly it's these experts in artificial intelligence, people who founded it and developed it, who know it best, who are issuing these stark warnings.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Mail sort of teases out the difference between the sort of slightly science fiction-y rise of the machines style threat that people like Elon Musk have talked about, and the threat talked about by most of the people who signed this letter, which is much more basically AI being used to enhance dangerous stuff that humans are already doing. So, for example, Jenny mentioned chemical weapons. This has, in fact, I believe, already happened. They developed an AI model to look at chemistry and try and work out new antidotes. And then somebody thought, okay, what happens if we flip that round? What if we ask it to do the opposite? And it developed some incredibly potent neurotoxins and toxins, including some of the ones that already exist and are some of the most dangerous in the world today. So that's the danger. The difficulty is that, you know, most of this stuff, if it's being used, if AI is being used, it's going to be used, as I said, for stuff humans are already doing. And that means it's very hard to coordinate, because ultimately, while there are exceptions, such as some areas of biotech, fundamentally, when you've got countries like China and the United States at loggerheads, there's very huge barriers to creating a real global framework. And if one set of powers or power worries that the other is using this technology to try and get a leg up in whatever field, the temptation is going to be there to do the same. And that's how you end up with a kind of arms race. So the danger is real. The danger is mostly that it just makes humans much more effective at working out ways to destroy the human race, which they're already pretty good at. But the difficulty is, how do you get everyone who could potentially use this dangerously to get around the table and agree not to do that?
Yeah, let's move on to another story that's on some of the front pages tomorrow, Jenny. The Guardian leading on this story of Boris Johnson's WhatsApp messages. The Cabinet Office have been given another 2 days to produce this material for the COVID inquiry. But certainly it's not a good look, is it, that the government's withholding this material? But certainly the government feels it has some grounds to protect the privacy of ministers. Tell us more.
Well, Rishi Sunak, as The Guardian says, is being accused of attempting to cover up the actions of ministers during the pandemic. This is after the Cabinet Office has refused to hand over the unredacted WhatsApps and diaries and notebooks of Boris Johnson to the COVID inquiry, even though they were requested. And for me, this is quite astonishing, because I would imagine if I was a minister, if I had been a minister during COVID, which we all viscerally felt was an extraordinary time, I would feel that everything that I wrote down or typed into my phone would be a matter of public record and would be disclosed well within the 30 years that is normally the kind of moratorium on public documents being disclosed. Boris Johnson apparently has said that he's happy for his notebooks, WhatsApps and diaries to be disclosed, that it's the Cabinet Office apparently that is being obstructive thus far. The Cabinet Office has said that it doesn't see the point of giving over things that would be irrelevant to the inquiry, but then it's making the judgment call of what's relevant to the inquiry, which is surely one for the people leading the inquiry to make. So it's not great, particularly at a time when we really do need transparency over something that we all have a stake in. We all want to know whether or not what was done was in the public interest when it came to us sacrificing massive personal freedoms. It matters very much. And at the moment, yes, it doesn't look very good for Rishi Sunak.
Henry, your thoughts on all of this? Certainly, if you're a minister and you're carrying out government business on WhatsApp, you can expect for your WhatsApp messages to perhaps be requested at some point.
Well, I think part of the problem is that was never, I think, previously entirely clear. And there is this sort of post-Freedom of Information Act arms race, where ministers looking for places, and officials looking for places to deliberate in private move further and further away from the official channels in an attempt to do that. And therefore, the lines of the official channels are gradually drawn more and more broadly to try and keep up with them, which I don't think helps anybody. So the government's got a few lines here, which is slightly confusing. The Cabinet Office insists simultaneously that it just wants to not send over stuff that isn't relevant, and also, according to some media reports, that it doesn't actually have the information. I don't see how both of those could be true. Most interestingly, Sir James Eadie, the Treasury Devil, one of the government's most senior lawyers, has said that actually there's a case that this is the communications between ministers are protected by cabinet collective responsibility, which mandates that there has to be a private space for free and frank discussion between ministers. I think that's an interesting argument, and we'll have to see where that goes. Ultimately, what's at stake here is Boris Johnson is being asked to hand over all of his WhatsApp communications with 40 people. And that will include not just official, what we might consider to be official business, but also everything else that they said. And he'll be worried that those will be leaked. We don't know how many people will see this information. It seems unlikely that the chair of the inquiry will review all of this information personally. So there are important things at stake here, because transparency is an important principle. But on the other hand, you do need government to have the space to have frank discussions. And there's a reason that the 30-year rule and later the 20-year rule existed in the first place. And that is a tension that we do have to resolve.
Jenny, I've seen you shaking your head at some of what Henry's been saying there. A brief thought from you.
I think you can have private discussions. You ring people up to talk, to have private discussions. I think, I'm an investigative journalist. Right at the beginning of learning my craft, I was told that you should expect that anything you write down will be disclosed in court. You know that when you type things or write them down, they're going to be disclosed. It shouldn't be a surprise to you. And I don't think it's a barrier to being able to have a frank discussion. The fact that disclosure might happen, if you can have conversations on the phone, and yes, they might be recorded, but there's not the same compulsion to disclose as there is of a diary or a notebook.
OK, Jenny, Henry, we'll give you a bit of a breather and see you again in a moment. Do stay with us, because we'll have more of the front pages coming up next, including the front page of The Guardian. Is Kyiv making a tactical and political mistake by launching drone attacks on Moscow? We'll be discussing that next. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me now, Jenny Kleeman and Henry Hill. Good to see you both again. Henry, let's kick off with you this time. Front page of the Express: civil servants are threatening to strike over migrants. MPs have demanded the sacking of civil servants, according to the Express, who are considering strike action over their plans to deport migrants to Rwanda. Tell us more.
Yeah, so essentially the Home Office is the department of all the departments where the government's apparent confrontation and difficulties with the civil service has been most acute. And today, the Civil Service Union has announced that staff are planning to go on strike because they think that the Rwanda policy is unlawful under international law. Now, this is problematic because it inevitably gets slightly technical. The UK is basically what's called a dualist state. International law has no legal standing in this country unless given effect by an act of parliament. So if the Rwanda policy is the government's policy and it has been passed by an act of parliament, there really is no basis for civil servants and other agents of the state to claim that international law is an equal or even superior law, and therefore to defy orders on that basis. It's very tricky politically for the government. You can call for mass sackings of civil servants, but then you have to, replace them with people. And it's not obvious that the government could do that quickly. But ultimately, the strike, I think the justification for the strike is deeply misguided. But it does show the sheer difficulty, the practical difficulty the government is having in carrying forward what its immigration policy.
And Jenny, your thoughts on this? Certainly, it will do nothing to improve relations between civil servants and ministers.
Yeah, relations between civil servants and ministers are at an all-time low. Many Conservative ministers and commentators making much of the civil service woke blob getting in the way of the will of government to carry out the policies that they have been elected to carry out. And this is off the back of Dominic Raab lost his job over his bullying allegations and claimed that there were sort of activist civil servants trying to push their agenda in the way of ministerial business. The fact is that ministers need to be able to work with civil servants, and civil servants need to be able to work with ministers. There has to be a way round this, rather than MPs threatening to sack striking civil servants when they don't agree on policy, although they're not supposed to agree or disagree on policy, or whether on the legality of policy. This is a sign, I think, of bad leadership in government for things to be so bad between the civil service and government. In order for this country to function properly, they have to be able to work together.
Do I detect you shaking your head there, Henry?
Jenny's point is generally true. I think that lots of Conservatives make way too much of the row with civil servants, and often it's a cover for ministers who simply aren't good at getting policy done, and they blame this kind of inchoate civil service conspiracy. But I think this case is different. This is a case of what is quite clearly a politically motivated strike on the basis that civil servants should not have to carry out policies with which they disagree, on the basis that it is in breach of international law, which, as I said, has no standing in this country. I think it's important to separate the specific facts of this case from the broader problem.
OK, I'm going to jump in there because I really want to get to the Ukraine story. Front page of The Guardian, Jenny. Certainly it felt like a very significant moment in the war today with that drone attack on Moscow's suburbs.
Yes, it's enormous. Many drones attacking a Moscow suburb, an affluent suburb where Vladimir Putin himself has a home. It's a significant breach of Russian defences. And as much as the Moscow mayor tried to play it down, and the defence ministry said it was 8 drones, it may have been 17 drones, that they've all been shot down. It's really worrying for Vladimir Putin because he's, of course, sold the war in Ukraine as a way of keeping Russia safer to his people. And now Russians, I think, feel scared. We saw lots of clips on social media of ordinary Russians really terrified about this. And it's also, we don't know who's behind it. Many analysts say they very much believe that Ukraine is behind it. This is after Kyiv has been facing, drone attack after drone attack for nights on end. But the really significant thing is this is a huge risk if Ukraine is behind this. It risks the support of European allies because it is an incursion into Russian territory. And Ukraine has said they're not going to use foreign weapons in Russia, but there's nothing to stop them using their own. So potentially this is a very significant moment.
Yeah. Jenny, Henry, it's been great to have you with us. We'll see you again next hour. Thanks so much.